Hello, my name's Will. I'm a baker. I'm based in the south of England. I like to bake sourdough bread, and I thought I'd put together a YouTube video that goes through the different stages of creating a loaf. I thought it could be useful to other bakers who are maybe starting on like the sourdough journey and might like a piece of advice about the sort of one or two of the stages. There's a few sort of like hints throughout the video that could hopefully, help other people, get a positive result. So I've been baking for probably about 10 years or in total, on and off. Sourdough baking specifically, probably for about a year now. And probably about the last 6 months, I've been getting, pretty half decent results. I don't consider myself an expert or anything. I just consider myself a bit of an enthusiast, and I'm sure there's other ways and methods of baking, but this one works for me, and hopefully it can be of use for some other people. So without further ado, let's get on with the video. Okay, so I just added some water there. That's just plain tap water. Say I live in the south of England, near the South Downs, so the water's really hard. I don't know what effect that actually has on the finished product, but yeah, it's our kettles are forever scaling up and failing. So yeah, that gives an indication of the type of water. So I always give a really thorough kind of mix. I just want to make sure that there's no sort of pockets of flour left in there, and that all the water flour is incorporated. And essentially, you end up with something similar to a sort of cake mix batter at the very end. But yeah, it's just work it and get the bubbles out. So this is a sourdough starter time-lapse video. So I started around about 9 a.m. and then the video finishes around about 6 p.m. So over an 8-9 hour period. Thought it'd be of an interest to see what the actual sourdough does, or the sourdough starter actually does over this sort of period. Because you see it on the side of the counter, and you don't really get a concept of how quickly or at what stage it is sort of like fermenting and growing and descending and everything. So it's rather interesting, really, for somebody who does this quite often but hasn't really seen this process. It's in my kitchen. I don't normally have it in direct sunlight. It was for the beginning of that video. It's around about 18, 19 degrees. It's sort of February, March time in the UK. As you can see, it goes through, I'd say, 3 distinct stages. The first is a very sort of slow growth stage, and then that middle stage is considerably faster. Bacteria and yeast is creating carbon dioxide and expanding and bubbles and volume. Really, the trick with your sourdough starter is to make sure that you catch it just on the absolute peak. So once it's either doubled or tripled in size, then you want to use it with your bread. So yeah, as I mentioned previously, I use a tap water. I use all-purpose high-protein flour. There's about 100 gram starter in the actual jar to start off with, and the starter itself was originally purchased off eBay. I bought a wet starter in the post, paid a couple of quid. It arrived, I fed it, it grew. I fed it, it grew. Eventually, I got it to the size that was required. So yeah, as you can see here, it's grown to its maximal, and now it's sort of slowly descending. So you would have wanted to have used it before that sort of stage, really, in order to keep that kind of trajectory of growth. Okay, so we're now at the mixing stage. I'm back on the kitchen counter. So straight off, I use a KitchenAid for all of my bread making. I don't get my hands dirty at all. I find it sort of nice and easy, and I get sort of repeatable results by using the same technique. And yeah, it's just I find it saves me a fair bit of time. I also use like the no knead method as well. So I allow my sort of ingredients to Autolyse, however you choose to pronounce it. What you can see here is I'm putting the ingredients together. So I've got 320 grams of strong white flour, Canadian strong white flour marriages, and 80 grams of marriages dark rye flour. I'm not sponsored. I just use that product. It's very good for bread making. It sort of gives a good rise. It's good protein, so it gives a good sort of final product. So 5 to mix, and then I add 10 grams of salt as well, which might sound like quite a bit, but in reality, you're making a fairly large loaf, so it's not really that much. And also, it's all flavour. It gives a great final product, so a bit of salt isn't too bad. I mean, obviously, there's limits to that, but yeah, 10 grams for a whole loaf is pretty standard. I use tap water again. I use 275 grams of tap water, 200 grams of starter, and as you'll see in a minute, I'll use I'll just mix that all together with the KitchenAid just to create a very rough dough. You don't want to mix it too much at this point because, as I say, using a sort of Autolyse method. I mean, the fact that salt's added means that it's not sort of a traditional Autolyse. But yeah, it's again the easiest method. You just stir that all together. You leave it for 30 minutes, then you come back to it, and the bread flour and the dark rye flour has absorbed that water, and it just means that when you start with the dough hook, sort of working the dough, that it makes it a lot easier and allows that gluten to develop. Okay, so that's just been brought together. So I'm just going to leave that in the bowl along with the dough hook, cover it with a reusable silicone covering, and then just walk away from that for 30 minutes. Okay, so the dough's been allowed to rest for around about 30 minutes. I normally do anywhere from between 20 to 40 minutes of that Autolyse. So now, I've got it working on the actual KitchenAid properly. So I use a KitchenAid Professional. It's a 315 watt. I think it's a 4.8 quart bowl. So the larger bowl with an arm lift as well, rather than the tilting head. The most important part about this stage is to you got to make sure that you work the dough at an appropriate amount. It's not underworked and it's not overworked. Traditionally or normally, I would do this around about 5 to 10 minutes on. Start off fairly slow, and then work up to like a stage, speed 8 or 9 on the actual KitchenAid eventually. The most important part about this is you can actually hear the dough sort of like hitting the side of the bowl. You get that slap sort of noise, and that way you know that it's been thrown and it's been sort of folded and worked, and it's doing everything that needs to be done to that dough to develop the gluten and to give it that strength for the next stage, for the actual proving. So I'm sped this video up a bit as well, so it'll look a bit bonkers as far as the actual speed goes. I mean, the most important thing is that you work it for long enough, and then eventually once you're done, or you think you're done, you can see that the dough has got that sort of elasticity, that kind of it's come together. It's got that texture and that consistency that sort of lets you know that it's ready for the next stage, which is the sort of the proof. Okay, so this is just coming to the end of the actual kneading process, or the KitchenAid kneading process, and that gluten's developed nicely. So yeah, it's on full speed at the moment, and then just take it all the way down, and then drop the bowl, and then you can see that dough is holding onto that hook. So a tip here is if you're going to be removing the dough from the hook, then it's important to wet your fingers first, and that just makes it a lot more easy for you to remove that dough without just getting covered yourself. So yeah, top tip. Okay, so once that's removed, you then your dough hook can be washed out, and then you get your silicone, reusable silicone cover back out, and cover that over, and then that's going to sit in the bowl for a good at least 2 hours at that sort of ambient temperature, 18-19 degrees Celsius. Okay, so you're at this stage now, so it's rested for just a couple of hours. This is the first prove. Personally, my first prove's a lot shorter than my second prove. My first prove's ambient, my second prove's in the fridge. So again, wet your hands, and makes the dough a lot more easy to handle and avoids getting your hands too messy, so the dough doesn't actually stick to your fingers. So yeah, so just removing the dough from the actual inside of the bowl. The quicker you are about it, the less messy it gets. Turning it out onto the surface, and then it's a case of using the dough scraper in order to move the dough around and to create a bit of surface tension. So again, this is a wet dough, so it's best not to use your hands if you don't have to. The dough scraper is a great tool. I'll put a link, an affiliate link, at the end of the video, so that you can get one of these absolutely essential equipment. So yeah, all that I'm trying to do here is to create a surface tension on the other side of that ball. So I'm just moving it around and using the dough scraper to keep it nice and tight on the surface, and to turn it into as much of a ball as I possibly can do, and then just to leave it out onto the surface to relax a bit before I go on to the next stage. So this is a quick time-lapse video just to show you over a 30-minute period what the dough looks like as it's relaxing. Okay, so this is the shaping stage, or the final shaping. I've got a banneton. I use a napkin to line the actual banneton, and I use liberal amounts of rice flour as well. It's a good option to use to prevent your dough from sticking to anything, as it's gluten-free, and it just helps prevent any kind of sticking. So yeah, you can't use too much really. I've got a rather handy shaker as well. That just makes it a lot easier, a lot more controllable. And then obviously cover the actual dough itself with a good dusting. So the whole idea of this final shaping process is again to create more surface tension. So the previous shaping was to create like the first level of tension, and now the idea is to finish that off. So you're stretching the dough out into as much of a square as possible, folding, and then rolling the dough up on itself in order to to get that tension. Tucking in the ends, and then dropping it into the basket. And then once it's actually in the basket or the banneton, then to fold again, You can see, you know, just pulling the sides in and over just to make sure that the underside of that dough is as taut as it possibly can be. That's what's going to prevent your dough from sort of turning into a puddle, essentially, when you turn it out onto the surface later before it actually goes into the oven. That and also the temperature of the dough itself. So what I do is I do a long second proof overnight. I put it within a bag to prevent the dough from drying out. It goes in the fridge overnight and then it gets baked the next morning. Okay, so just taking the dough out of the fridge. You can see it's risen really nicely, and so sort of filled the banneton. So I'll take the bag, dry it out, and I'll reuse it again for the next bake. So I always bake on parchment paper. So I'm reusing the previous piece of paper that I used. This is, you know, it's good for probably about 4 or 5 bakes before it sort of becomes a bit too brittle to use again. So yeah, turning out and then scoring, the art of scoring. So I've got a lame which I bought off eBay, super cheap. Razor blades, again super cheap, and then I just use a single score method just across the entire length. Haven't quite got the technique to doing it just once. If I do it just once, it tends to be a bit too sharp. Okay, so the oven's been warming up for about an hour, at least an hour, to the maximum temperature. So mine goes up to about 230 C. Yeah, so really, yeah, your cast iron pot. So I use a cast iron pot for my baking, so it keeps all the moisture within, allows the oven spring to be the best it possibly can be on your loaf. So this is absolutely scorching hot. So I use the parchment paper as a hammock in order to drop the actual bread into the dish. Once it's in, then replacing the lid, which sort of keeps that moisture and that steam within that sort of environment. Yeah, close it up and then leave it on maximum temperature, and then leave it in there for 20 minutes for this first stage. Okay, so after 20 minutes of cooking at that maximum temperature, alarm's gone off, and now it's time to take the lid off the cast iron pot or the Dutch oven. Yeah, so opening that again, being super careful because everything is ridiculously hot. And then this is the moment of truth. You can see that that there's been a good rise, and it will be a nice loaf. So all the rising's over essentially now for that loaf. So you just leave it back in there, turn the temperature down, and we turn mine down to about 180, and then give it another 20 minutes. Okay, so the final loaf is baked. So yeah, another 20 minutes after the initial 20 minutes at 180. So yeah, ready to come out. You see it's got a good colour, a nice rise. It's yeah, a good sourdough loaf, really. So yeah, it's just the trick now of getting it out of the cast iron pot. I'll just turn the camera upside down, and then yeah, putting it out onto a cooling rack. You want to leave it for at least 20 minutes. It's difficult, I know, with fresh bread, but you won't be able to sort of carve it or slice it in any way for at least 20 minutes. So yeah, then remove the parchment paper. I gave it just a quick tap as well, just for that hollow sound, so that you know that it's baked all the way through. And then yeah, and happy eating. So thanks for watching. Yeah, if any comments or requests or anything like that, then just please let us know in the remarks below. All right, thank you. Bye.